Vision. Following clues left by our ancestors, we unbury the past to reveal a knowledge of unfathomable value, putting us just a little closer to our own true birthrights. From the secret history of a possible bloodline of Jesus Christ, the secret history of America's founders, to the secret history of extraterrestrial interaction on our planet, here to bring light to the night. Your host for Night Vision Radio, Rene Barnett.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Night Vision. If this is your first time here, I hope you'll enjoy yourself enough to come back again. Like to remind everyone or advise everyone that next week, Night Vision has a brand new time slot. It's not much different. It's only going to be an hour later, which also means we're going to be running an hour later. So we will be airing live every Friday night starting next week from 11 p.m. Eastern time to 1 a.m. So don't miss us and don't get here too early. Actually, if you get here early, you'll have a special treat because I believe Andrea Perrin is starting her new show on KGRA next week. So if you get here a little too early, you're going to get a special surprise because you're going to see Andrea. So you might want to come even earlier. But having said all that, my guest tonight is I'm excited about for couple of reasons, mainly because of his expertise in the fields that we're going to be talking about, but also because he's a pal, and also because he is bringing his show to KGRA, and it's going to start this Sunday. We're going to talk more about that a little bit later. But anyhow, tonight we're going to be talking about the strange world of true crime and the paranormal, where those two sort of cross over. And I mean, we've all heard even back to the classics of, you know, a murder victim coming back to haunt their killer, or to beg for to be found, or to have a final resting place. But there are also some crimes that have elements of the paranormal, which we will get into. I have a couple of my favorites. I know I've admitted already on this channel that I am a true crime buff, and always have been. And I came by it honestly because my mother was. And you know, even when I moved away, my mom would send me packages full of, you know, the latest true murders. So I've probably read just about every true murder that there is. Maybe not so much recently, but I have a feeling I'm going to get back into that area a little bit again. But without further delay, I'll invite my guest, Ken DeCosta. And
hello,
Ken
Rene
is the co-host, along with George R. Lopez, of Dead Air, which is a fabulous show on a different channel. But from this week forward, they'll be right here on KGRA. So I hope everyone will check them out on Sunday. I know they're going to bring their own crowd over because they've got a lot of fans already. I'm hoping some of those might bleed over, you know, into my show, but, you know, who knows? How are you doing, Jen?
Like, come along with us.
Come on down.
Follow us. It's like, hey, Rene, it's good to see you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me tonight. I think this is going to be interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, I do too. You know, one thing that made me think of it, not exactly crime, or I guess there was a possible suspected crime, but recently I connected you with a good friend of mine in England who is a popular radio show host there, Mike Perry.
Yeah.
And he actually called me to ask if I'd be interested in coming on his show to talk about the Cecil Hotel, the infamous Cecil Hotel. Yeah, there are a lot of crimes there. And, you know, then there's, of course, that unfortunate story about the young girl, Elisa Lam, which I don't believe was a crime. I'm going to ask you more about that later. But I said, wait a minute, you don't want me, Michael. You want Ken DeCosta. So fortunately, you were gracious enough to accept his kind invitation, and heard you
we
guys
had a great
really
time.
good time and a good show, and came up with some very interesting information there.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's kind of what made me, when I knew I was going to have you on, because as soon as I heard you were coming over, I was like, oh my God, we got to do a show just before he starts his show and sort of preview what he's going to be doing. And we got a lot of fun stuff we can talk about, because I know you're definitely knowledgeable in the areas of the paranormal, crime, and paranormal, running the gamut, not just ghosts, but all paranormal.
Well, just to be clear, I'm involved in one of those, the paranormal.
Yes.
Not that involved in crime right now. So
No,
let's not
hopefully
start
not.
any rumors.
Hopefully you are not involved at all in crime.
As far as you know.
Otherwise, you'd be doing your show on KGRA from your prison cell, and we just couldn't have that.
No, bad Wi-Fi there.
Yeah, no Wi-Fi at all.
No.
Oh, but anyhow, so yeah, I knew your areas of expertise. I knew you had some good stuff about crime that you and I have never really had the opportunity to get involved in. But there have been some crimes throughout, I'm talking about modern history, in sort of current history, 70s onward, that have really fascinated me for some of the elements of the crimes themselves that seem to have some sort of paranormal aspect. Mm-hmm. So I have my sort of favorites, if that's a good word to call a murder. But I certainly have those that I've delved into very deeply. Some that I have definitely personal connections with, from people that investigated, from police officers to the media. The only guy that was able to be interviewed, or to interview the killer, was my old boss when I was a news reporter in Tulsa. And it was my old boss that he was the only one that would talk to. But it was a very famous case. It was called the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, and tons of stuff on that. We'll get to that a little bit later. But first, Ken, what do you got? I mean, what do you want to get into in terms of crime? I know you've got a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and for our audience tonight, we've loaded some clips up, some of the more famous or infamous crimes in terms of how they connect to the occult, because I think that door swings both ways. A lot of people say they're motivated by the occult. Some people, once they begin their reign of terror, sort of go into that kind of thing because they identify with evil, they identify with negativity, they identify with Satanism, because I think that there is, to some degree, an awareness of exactly what it is that they're doing. Their pathology, in terms of what motivates them, what drives them to take another person's life, there is an awareness on their part that what they're doing is wrong. But a lot of times they rationalize that in thinking that there's a higher calling for them to do this. And they're motivated by that. They're doing Satan's work, whatever, the case may be as far as the individuals. But there are a lot of these type of crimes, a lot of them that have that sort of paranormal element to them, or probably a better way to term it is the occult element to them, because we're not so much talking about hauntings per se. At that point, we're talking about what motivates these people.
Yeah, you do hear definitely stories about murders being committed in a ritualistic fashion, and sometimes they do find out that it was a satanic ritual or something like that. And I truly believe, it sounds kind of crazy to speak it out loud, but I do believe in the forces of good and evil. I do believe I believe they're sentient forces. I think you can dabble in the wrong things. And I'm not talking about being curious about reading about the paranormal or investigating. I'm talking about purposely trying to manipulate things to your own advantage, that to purposely hurt other people or just collaterally damage other people. So, and I think there's kind of almost a way of getting sort of eaten up by once you start dabbling in doing things like that, I think it's kind of hard to then get back on the right track.
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough,
but I just feel that there are some forces of evil out there that are kind of waiting to just, grab you.
Yeah. Or you invite them.
Exactly. They're waiting for
whatever the case may be. Interestingly enough, true Satanists are often upset and turned off by some of these killings, which purport to be done in the name of the Dark Lord, because a lot of times these pentagrams and a lot of the graffiti that's left behind ritualistically are just archaic runes that really don't have any meaning. They, it's just a bunch of kids, got them off an album cover or something like that, tried to recreate them. But Satanists, in the true sense of that word, are often very upset that the finger eventually is pointed at them, when these people are just basically dabbling in it in name only. There's no real ideology there to it whatsoever. So, I mean, sounds kind of funny that it gives Satanists a bad name, but nonetheless, it's true.
Oh my gosh, I feel so bad.
I mean, it does. It's true to a very large degree that people kind of pin these on, the Satanic Church and so forth.
I've heard that. And honestly, I think sometimes that's true. I think sometimes people will jump to the, ritual explanation when it really wasn't that. Like you said, it's maybe a bunch of kids, just doing stuff and ritual really didn't have anything to do with it. But yeah, I'm not too worried about the Satanists getting upset. Although I will say, I don't know a lot about what their ideology or philosophy is, so I'll reserve any further comments on that.
Well, there's also been instances where people have used those type of things to throw people off the scent. There have been crimes of passion, jealousy, maybe a drug deal gone bad, where people have staged satanic elements to just sort of suggest that that's the reason for it, but they're really not. But it just happens to throw everybody off the trail.
Yeah. Well, I know we've got some, infamous and weird crimes to talk about. So I think, shall we show a little clip and then talk about it on the other side?
It's dealer's choice here tonight, whatever you'd like.
All right, dealer's choice. I think I'll go with Son of Sam.
David Richard Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam and 44 caliber killer, is an American serial killer who pleaded guilty to 8 shootings that began in New York City on July 29, 1976. After his discharge from the Army, David turned to the occult for meaning and purpose in his empty life. By 1976, the occult had become a complete obsession with him. Using a .44 special caliber Bulldog revolver, he killed 6 people and wounded 7 others by July of 1977. The killing spree terrorized New Yorkers and gained worldwide notoriety. Berkowitz eluded the biggest police manhunt in the history of New York City while leaving letters that mocked the police and promised further crimes, which were highly publicized by the press. After consulting with several psychiatrists, police released a psychological profile of their suspect in May of 1977. He was described as neurotic and probably suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, and believed himself to be a victim of demonic possession. When captured, he confessed to all of the killings and initially claimed to have been obeying the orders of a demon manifested in the form of a dog named Harvey belonging to his neighbor, Sam. Police searched his apartment and found it in disarray, with satanic graffiti on the walls. Berkowitz alluded to his original story of demonic possession, but closed with a warning that has been interpreted by some investigators as an admission of criminal accomplices. Quote, "There are other sons out there. God help the world," end quote. In 1979, Berkowitz mailed a book about witchcraft to police in North Dakota. He had underlined several passages and written a few marginal notes, including the phrase, "Arliss Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, Stanford University." The reference was to Arliss Perry, a 19-year-old North Dakota newlywed who had been murdered at Stanford on October 12th of 1974. Berkowitz mentioned the Perry attack in other letters, suggesting that he knew details of it from the perpetrator himself. Berkowitz then began to claim that he had joined a satanic cult in the spring of 1975. In 1993, Berkowitz made these claims known when he announced to the press that he had killed only 3 of the Son of Sam victims. He said that he and several other cult members were involved in every incident by planning the events, providing early surveillance of the victims, and acting as lookouts and drivers at the crime scenes. Berkowitz stated that he could not divulge the names of most of his accomplices without putting his family directly at risk. He did name 2 of the cult members, John and Michael Carr. The 2 men were sons of the dog owner, Sam Carr, and they lived nearby. From prison, Berkowitz continued to assert and expand upon his claims of demonic possession. He stated in a series of 9 videos in 2015 that the voice he heard was that of Samhain, a druid devil, and the true origin of Son of Sam. He added that it never was a dog, saying that detail was fabricated by the media. David explained that he felt like a soldier on a mission when he went out to kill. He was convinced that Satan would set him free of his emotional pain and loneliness through the act of murder. Instead, despite some initial euphoria, each murder left David feeling empty and unfulfilled. Berkowitz has been incarcerated since his arrest and is currently serving 6 consecutive life sentences.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So, just a little side note on that. I don't know a lot about the Son of Sam crimes. I mean, I probably once did and have forgotten a lot more. I did not remember the Arliss Perry story.
Yeah.
The woman who was murdered at Stanford. I did not remember that, or having a linkage with Son of Sam. But as I was telling you before we went live on broadcast tonight, a good friend of mine back in the day, I was working on the show Strange Universe, which was a paranormal news magazine, which aired every night in the United States and I guess around the world because it was syndicated. But Wayne Darwin was a writer on our show. Excellent writer. Oh, he could make anything sound great. But I don't remember what it was. We were doing something on the Son of Sam story, and he got in contact with David Berkowitz, and they became pen pals after that. And this was after David's so-called religious conversion. I believe he became a born-again Christian.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken about that. But yeah, that was just a tiny little note. It was just funny that Wayne, who's this wild, Aussie guy, ended up communicating with the serial killer. But so what was it that fascinated you so much about this, because I believe a lot of it is still muddy, isn't it? Like, did we ever find out about accomplices or other parties?
I think that, well, first of all, Netflix had a series on this. And I think it kind of brought it back to the public eye a little bit, where a journalist named Maury had kind of delved into this a little bit and became actually obsessed by it. And his leads literally traced this back to a cult in England that eventually reached into the States. And he maintains that Berkowitz became sort of a part of this, an ancillary part of this cult. And Untermeyer was a park in New York, and was known for some ritualistic things that were going on there with animals and things like that. So a lot of times when you start pulling on threads, everything sort of unravels. The drawback to that is that you can start connecting dots that don't belong. So it's a very, very fine line to walk.
That's right. That's right.
So
you have to be so careful not to let it just take you away.
Yeah. And I think that's what happened to him. It was very much an obsession of his. But if anybody wants to watch the Netflix documentary, I suggest you do that.
I'm gonna have to do that,
and they're going to give you more information.
Yeah.
Personally,
was that cult named, and does it still exist?
I don't believe it still exists. And it even stretched to the Hamptons in New York, where a very wealthy man who had ties to it was murdered in his multi-million-dollar mansion. And there were a lot of ritualistic things. There were a lot of, orgies and things were held there. And there were specific rooms that he used in this place to engage in that. From a personal standpoint, I know this much, that you want to say that he was probably the lone person that was responsible for this.
That's what I like.
But there is enough compelling evidence out there where he was seen, and in terms of where he was seen and when shots were fired, there's some question as to whether or not he would be able to navigate that area in the time it took for those shots to be fired. So it suggests in some cases he may have been working in concert with others, and on that particular night he was perhaps the lookout. Yeah. So I think that there is strong enough evidence, certainly, that suggests that there were more than one person involved in this, in these shootings. Berkowitz, of course, took the fall for it, and he did so gladly, partly because he was very afraid of this cult, that even though he was incarcerated, that somehow they had tentacles long enough to reach into prison to get him. So he left little breadcrumb trails like the Arliss Perry story to let everyone know, on the one hand, that he was part of something bigger and he had information, but only up to a point, because he was afraid for, family. He was afraid for himself. So, I mean, that's his story.
That's his story, yeah.
But from a pragmatic standpoint, I see no reason to just dismiss the idea that this wasn't part of a bigger network. And it could have been just a group in New York. He mentioned those two brothers that were just, went down that rabbit hole and decided to go off and do this on their own.
Wow. Yeah. Now, I wonder, so in that Netflix documentary, I'm assuming that they might have gone and interviewed him recently.
Actually, no.
Was it all just about the crimes? Yeah. I wonder now, what his attitude would be. I wonder if he, of course, you would never know if his story changes, which it has done a few times. First he said it was the dog, then he said it wasn't. I think he's the one that came up with the dog thing. I don't think it was the police. But anyway, if he would talk, I guess unless he gave information that people could follow up on. But a network like that would have a really hard time today, because what they would have done had these crimes happened last year is check his digital footprint and all cellular towers and all kinds of things. So there would have been a lot more evidence, and
it was
difficult to hide your movements.
Yeah, it was that time where I was around 20 years old, and he's just a kid. So I lived through it and read the papers, and literally the people of New York were terrified. It was the very definition of
Were you there?
Terrorism.
Were you in New York?
No, I was here in New England. I was in Rhode Island, but this was a worldwide story.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
It terrorized people to the point that there was a certain profile in terms of the women he targeted.
Yes.
Brown hair, long, curly, and literally people or women all over New York were having their hair cut, so they didn't fit the profile. So he held a city that at the time was already going through a lot of economic issues. New York was broke, and it was a really desolate and gray place to be back then. And then you add this onto it, and there was just such an element of fear and trepidation in the air. But I think what happened to Berkowitz, though, and it's not to minimize anything that any of these characters did, but it seemed like this was a guy that, by all intents and purposes, the reports are he was a pretty affable kid in high school. Okay, he held a job. He was a conscientious worker. He went into the military, and perhaps there was some episode, something in the military kind of changed him, but this was kind of a lonely kid. And like a lot of them, they're looking to belong to something. And, rather than join, a softball league for companionship, some of these people kind of choose the other path and want to belong and become part of something.
Choose the ones that welcome them in. A lot of these guys are kind of misfits and loners, like you said, and they're not the easiest people to, get out and socialize and just be a regular person, a regular guy. But if someone pays them attention and welcomes them in and, that sort of thing, that can go a long way, especially to a young person who's very insecure.
Manson was like that, in as much as a lot of those people in the Manson family, they didn't come from destitute backgrounds. Many of them were middle class.
Oh, yeah.
But they were disillusioned with the world. And these are the kind of people that are targeted for these type of cults. Somebody who's looking to belong to something, that are just a little disenfranchised. And in the case of a David Berkowitz, it seemed like, a lot of times once you're in, it's difficult to get out. But you can go to the extreme where being a part of this can compel you to do some really horrific things.
Yeah. That's why it's so important, to teach our children not to bully. And, a lot of these people who end up being, mass killers and things like that are kids that have been outcasts and been bullied and ridiculed and things like that. And it just doesn't bode well. Now, having said that, and I totally agree that, there's probably something in all these killers' backgrounds that somehow led them to what they did. Some people seem to be exceptions. They seem to have quite a normal, home life, supportive family, and all that stuff. And still, they go off and do something heinous. But also, I think that, I mean, that's sort of cause, but one of the effects that I believe that they enjoy, and I wouldn't doubt David Berkowitz as well, is like you said, he had the whole city of New York hostage.
Yeah.
What power.
Yeah.
I
And that's
think it's like,
exactly.
and if you're powerless, that can be intoxicating.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and you hit the nail on the head there with a lot of these people that, like I say, are disillusioned, disenfranchised. Maybe they're
Yeah.
lonely. Maybe they're socially awkward. They've been rejected to some degree by their friends, their peers, kids in school, their relatives,
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. That
Kids can be awful
suddenly,
sometimes.
yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, and that's what a lot of times sex crimes are about. It's that
Yeah.
feeling of power that you have over
Oh,
another
yeah,
human being,
for sure.
because oftentimes this is why on some of these killings you have things like mirrors taken off the walls or turned around because they don't want to see their own reflection in them.
Yeah.
But they want someone to beg and plead for their life. And then later on, of course, if we're lucky enough to catch them and they relate the story to us and they start breaking it down, you'll see a very common or a certain common denominators in these things where you are looking for someone to beg for their life. You have that intense feeling, as you say, of control and power. And they go hand in hand where otherwise it's something they didn't have in their lives. Maybe they've been put upon at work, whatever. Hey, listen, we unfortunately see it all the time with work shootings and things like that, where
Yes.
somewhere along the line, somebody is put upon, and if they are all, it doesn't mean everyone's going to do it. There has to be a certain
No.
psychosis that goes with this as well, hand in
Yes.
hand. It's not for everybody. Some people just say, hey, I'm quitting my job, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
But then some people are looking for retribution, and that's when the psychotic break happens.
Yeah. 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 And, to be fair, also, some of these slights that they resent so much are not necessarily real, but perceived, So certainly, when we're talking about bullying, there's even bullying on the job and, horrible bosses and things like that, unfair situations. But sometimes, I don't know. I mean, have you ever known someone that, you kind of feel like you have to walk on eggshells when you talk with them because they're like looking for something, that you've said against them, or what do you mean by that? And I'm going like, whoa, I didn't mean anything by that.
Yeah, sure.
I think some people have a skewed view, and are just predisposed to be offended, and be indignant. But
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I mean, I was bullied in school.
so was I. I was always fat, so I got called fatty all the time.
I
And
was too, but
I still remember every person who ever did that. So
yeah,
them,
you
who
know,
you are.
with me, it was the kind of thing where, I'm like 6'4", right? So when I was 13, I was already like 5'10", 5'11".
Yeah,
So I kind of stuck out. But the idea is, physically, I may have looked a lot older, but I was still a 13 and 14-year-old little kid,
that's right.
and still developing. So I dealt with that in school. And a lot of times what happens is some people have a difficult time getting over that. And this is
Yeah,
where a lot of times, even later in life, you become a people pleaser because you're just conditioned to have any kind of rejection just kind of weigh on you a little bit. And sometimes, usually behind every bully, there's a scared little kid
yes.
inside the bully who just is looking for slights, both real and imagined,
Hmm.
because it triggers something in them. And that's, I think, falls into the category of some of these people. I mean, we can call them wackos and So a lot of them were caught and put in prison. And I'll be honest with you, which I think is too good for them in light of the things that they did.
Yeah.
But a lot of times those triggers kind of manifest themselves in different ways. And even as adults, sometimes it's hard to work through your formative years and the things that you dealt with back then. And you have to be able to catch yourself and just say, no, I'm not 14 again.
Yeah.
I'm an adult. So you're looking for that kind of respect.
It's kind of interesting, how people will hang on to things that happened to them as a kid in school.
Sure.
And, like for decades, they'll hold like these hard feelings and grudges and all this stuff. And I think, oh my God, that stuff is so far in the past, but I will say,
but is it really?
I remember every single person who ever called me fat. So look out. Okay.
Gotta believe it. I see people who connect with me on Facebook I have not literally seen in 30 years. Hey, how you doing? It's like, you hated me. You made my life miserable. So,
oh wow.
I'm not going to seek revenge, but I just don't want to engage with you because my thing has always been, I hope that if you had children and grandchildren, they did not treat any other person like grandma or mom treated other people.
Yeah.
I hope that you may have learned something for them as far as nurturing these kids, because their grandmother was a real,
as a society, about how well it works out when we treat others terribly. Doesn't work out for us too well. It might be what some people call fun in the moment, but it definitely could come back to bite you and everybody else big time.
Yeah,
but
we're looking for short-term solutions in what could be a long-term problem.
Oh yeah. But from that, from Son of Sam on the East Coast, how about if we go to the West Coast out here, my territory, to one of the murders that I was impacted by, just because I was a citizen of Los Angeles. Shall we?
Night Stalker Richard Ramirez's highly publicized home invasion and murder crime spree terrorized the residents of the greater Los Angeles area and later the residents of the San Francisco Bay Area from June 1984 until August 1985. He used a wide variety of weapons, including handguns, knives, a machete, a tire iron, and a claw hammer. In 1989, Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. Ramirez left satanic pentagrams on some victims and forced others to swear allegiance to Lucifer. When arrested, he claimed to be a minion of Satan. At a younger age, Richard was obsessed with sexual images and believed that Jesus would shun him because of his thoughts and feelings, but Satan would embrace him and give him solace, protection, and understanding. Ramirez's fascination with Satan weirdly intensified after attending a Jehovah's Witness Bible study class with friends Eddie Milam and Tom Ramos. Ramirez then visited numerous public libraries, searching for books on the occult and learning all he could about Satanism and black magic. He started reading about Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, and at some point made the trip to San Francisco to meet LaVey. When I met Richard Ramirez, he was one of the nicest, most polite young men you'd ever want to meet, LaVey told the press, in the wake of the killing. He felt compelled to partake in their rituals, but eventually denounced the cult and began to practice alone. His belief in Satan was a deep-seated belief in the power of Lucifer to protect and empower his disciples. It wasn't until Ramirez left a pentagram written with lipstick on the wall and on the leg of a victim that investigators drew a connection to satanic worship. In subsequent years, he would leave more of these pentagrams behind and would occasionally tell his victims to swear to Satan instead of God to escape death. When he was eventually identified as the Night Stalker, and after being recognized by photos of him placed by police and local papers, he was chased down and caught and beaten by a group of citizens as he tried to escape their pursuit. During subsequent trial delays, Ramirez consciously perfected his image as a bad boy outsider. He played the role of a rock star killer to the hilt, flashing satanic symbols to the courtroom, staring down the prosecution and jury, and constantly praising Satan. Unrepentant for what he had done, in his very first court appearance he famously uttered the words, "Hail Satan." After the prosecution completed their presentation of the gruesome evidence, the jury convicted Ramirez of 13 counts of murder. Sentenced to die in California's gas chamber, Ramirez responded, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." In the early 1980s...
Whoops.
See you in Disneyland.
See you in Disneyland. Now, didn't he just die?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cancer, I believe.
What a, and I've seen a lot of interviews with, neighbors and family members who grew up with him, and they just said he was just the sweetest and nicest little boy. It's just so crazy.
Yeah, the operative word there being little boy, because,
yeah.
Again, we're not minimizing anything that these people did, but in his case, he was a witness to physical and sexual abuse as a child, and then eventually fell in with an uncle of his who was essentially a peeping Tom. And young Richard would accompany him on his nightly rounds, peeking inside people's windows. So this idea of voyeurism stayed with him. So again, a product of an abusive and the word I'm looking for, I can't think of it right now, but sort of
deviant.
Weird, odd, deviant. Thank you. Kind of upbringing. So again, we're not excusing anything, because I think jail was too good for him. I'll tell you why in a bit when we get into it. But again, you're talking about someone who, at a very young age in his formative years, was already turning away, because there was also animal killing, and a lot of times that's how this starts.
That's a precursor. Yeah.
With a cat, a dog, a bird, and then suddenly that curiosity, that thrill isn't enough. Yeah. And then it's harming people, and that's not enough. And this type of thing sadly escalates.
Yeah. Well, I was here in Los Angeles during the rampage of the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. And I remember it really well because it was so hot that summer. And that was a number of years back. And it wasn't as hot, generally here in Los Angeles as it is today. It's gotten a lot warmer since I've been here the last couple of decades. But it was so hot, we had to shut all the windows, and we really didn't have air conditioning that much because we just didn't need it. But oh my gosh, I can remember, having all the windows in the house. It's just suffocating. And I've got a big box fan propped up at the end of my bed, and it's just blowing hot air. But I wasn't about to leave any. I even bought these things that you screw into the windows, so that they cannot be open. I had these big sliding windows all around my bedroom. And so I drilled holes in them and put bolts in them so that you couldn't move them. But one day, when I went to work, I was in the corporate world at that time in another lifetime. My secretary, Rachel, came in, and they had an encounter with the Night Stalker at their home. There was her husband. It was really late at night, but he was up and it was hot. He had the front door open. And he happened to get up and he looked and he saw this guy walking toward the house. But as soon as the guy saw him up and alert, he went the other way. He went to the house that was across the street, which was like this big Victorian mansion. And it was full of Los Angeles firefighters. It was, there was like, I don't know how many bedrooms, but, they were sharing that space. And I know one of them, he walked into the house and one of them started chasing him down the street and the fireman was just in his underwear. But he ended up murdering 2 women about 2 doors down from my friend Rachel.
2 sisters, correct? 2 elderly
2
women.
sisters, older sisters, and living alone. And that was in Monrovia, California. And we just couldn't believe that, out of all the millions of homes, it struck that close, and that's how everyone felt, of course, is that, he could be anywhere. And he felt like he was almost omnipresent. It's like you didn't dare take a chance because that just might be the time that the Night Stalker is outside your house.
Yeah.
But
again,
the cool thing was when he got captured by the neighborhood,
that's the way it should always end.
Yeah.
With the neighbors chasing him and beating him with a fence post.
Yeah.
And actually,
a pregnant lady's Mustang, and she yelled, and her husband ran out with a pipe, and then the neighbors all started coming out, and they chased him. They beat the poop out of him.
When the cops showed up, he actually ran to the cruiser for safety. Get me out of here. Right. So in a case like this with Richard Ramirez, again, someone's searching for something, and they said at a prayer meeting is something kicked in on him and affected him. But when the Church of Satan actually rejects you for being too crazy for them, you know that there's a problem there. When he actually met with Anton LaVey, and who said, he seemed to be a nice kid, but it wasn't enough for him because he was looking for chaos. He was a perpetrator of chaos. It didn't come to him. He took more of a motivation to create chaos. And in his case, you can call it cowardice if you want to. I understand that you're going to pick on the most vulnerable. And usually that was elderly women or people in bed that were in a vulnerable state who couldn't fight back. You saw what happened when people were able to, whether it's the firemen chasing them or a group of neighbors that were like, we're just going to beat you to death here. But a lot of times they'll pick on the most vulnerable, whether they be women, elderly women, children, people in bed, people in a vulnerable state, because it's easier to perpetrate these crimes. There was sexual assault involved in a lot of his attacks because of his issues with women and how he felt about women. So
another way to express his aggression,
Yeah. I mean, so you can say that he was influenced by evil forces. I never bought the demonic part of it. I just think he was an inherently evil person. Now, we can talk about his upbringing and all the rest of that and rationalize that. And we're not trying to do that. We're not trying to rationalize anything that this monster did. But you can clearly see that he considered himself an agent of evil. He was carrying out in his own mind what evil satanic forces would expect of him, thinking that there was something coming back to him. He would somehow be protected. And he was somehow doing this in the name of a higher power. And unfortunately, he was able to do so, until he was caught and wreak a lot of havoc and tragedy and some heinous acts until that time happened.
He really did. It was really a time of terror. But yet, some lady married him in prison.
Yeah, that's,
What's up with that?
I'm going to speak on that for a minute because there is a
Please.
nut job out there who uses a spirit box in the paranormal, and his thing is to connect with as many famous people as possible, as soon as possible. And, it's okay to call him soulless or an opportunist, but, you're taking advantage of grief and you're appropriating the attention that's put on these people and directing it at yourself.
Yeah.
His latest thing was with Gabby Petito. We did a spirit box session too. So, I mean, you shake
that's too soon.
You just shake your head. But the bigger the bigger point with that is this fascination with serial killers. Okay. Where women think of them as rock stars. In Ramirez's case, he played the role. He got the sunglasses in court and, the whole thing. What happens I think it's in our DNA. Like, why are we fascinated by serial killers and true crime? I think that as human beings, we are predisposed to find answers to something we don't understand. We're hardwired that way. We like to label and categorize things and put everything in order so we can understand it, and this is like the paranormal is no different. You see something you've never seen before, and just like in medieval times, immediately you deem it to be supernatural.
Yes.
Because you've never seen it before, because we're so arrogant. We think we know everything. Science has cataloged everything. So you see something you don't understand and immediately you say it's supernatural. And even that is an explanation, and you're satisfied with that. Well, it's supernatural. It's paranormal. Aha, our work here is done. We figured it out. With serial killers, we have this innate sense in us to try to make sense out of chaos. We are fascinated with trying to find an explanation for something that's inexplicable. Like, why do these people commit these acts? We can't fathom it. So I think innately it fascinates us. And with some women who marry these guys in prison, you see female prison guards run away with them, and they're writing them love letters. I think it's part of that idea that you're trying to humanize people. And you see it all the time when there's a victim of a crime and they call that victim by their first name all the time. And you assign a name because it humanizes them, makes them more human.
Yeah.
And I think what happens when these people get that kind of attention that serial killers get, and it's a slippery slope because you don't want to give them attention, but by the same token, you got to let people know what's going on in the world. So it's a double-edged sword there. So I think people just become enamored with the idea of a celebrity. We are a celebrity cult. We're a cult of personality because social media and 24-hour cable news and all these things that bombard us, we have become a cult of celebrity. Anybody can go on TikTok and Facebook and, become a celebrity, do a dance. So we're enamored with that. And I think that's where a lot of this attention comes from on these otherwise crazy people.
Yeah, I think so too. It's just kind of unbelievable. I mean, I can understand the curiosity part. I have that for sure. I've tried to examine why I've always been interested in true crime. And I think it's because I can't really relate to it. And so it's like, I want to crack it. I want to find out what the meaning is, why this happened, and how is it that a person can actually carry out such horrible acts against other people. It's just amazing. But yet I've never thought about marrying a serial killer or found one attractive at
Well,
all.
it's okay to have standards, you know.
Hey,
You at least set a bar.
My bar is very low.
Yeah. I mean, you know, here's the bar in terms of relationships. Don't marry a serial killer. Everything else beyond that, it's gravy.
Everything is open. It looks like it's coming right up on time for our break. And so I hope you guys will stay with us. We'll be back in about 3 minutes with more of Ken DeCosta.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Welcome back to Nightvision. I'm your host, Rene Barnett, and we are talking with Ken DeCosta, who will be premiering his show on KGRA on Sunday. What time is your show, Ken?
We are on Sundays from 8 to 10 Eastern. Myself and my esteemed co-host, Mr. George R. Lopez.
Yes.
So we've been doing this show for a couple of years now, actually, and we could not be more happy for the opportunity, the KGRA, to invite us to become part of their family. So many people we already know, many of whom we've hosted on our show as guests. So with our show, we're going to cover topics and have guests on in regards to all facets of the paranormal, whether that's UFO phenomena, cryptids, the occult, ghosts and hauntings. So we're going to cover all of those subjects and give people an opportunity to meet the people, the actual person behind, you know, whatever paranormal celebrity or prominent person in the field we have on, get you a little bit about them. And we're going to do it with some humor. That's always been the hallmark of what we do. We like to have a good time. We're sort of like, always wanted to be the people that you'd invite into your house to have coffee or a couple of drinks and have some laughs with. So a lot of the subject matter is serious, but we hope to be entertaining and engaging and make you laugh and make you think. And so we're looking forward to that opportunity. So 8 to 10. Saturday, Sunday, Eastern, right here on KGRA, Dead Air. Come check us out.
Ooh, I'm excited. It's, when I knew it was a sure thing, I got very excited. The phone lines and the text messages were buzzing back and forth among several of us over here at KGRA. So we were all really excited and happy, and
We
very
are
much
too.
looking forward to working with you on
I
KGRA.
want to say before we continue, a special shout out to Jackie, who's in chat, who is a longtime
Jackie
listener
is
of Dead
awesome.
Air. And Jackie is just, always giving us a lot of support. And, she knows we're crazy.
Yes, yes. And so do I. So that's what I'm looking forward to. You are serious researchers who don't take yourselves too seriously, which is always a good thing.
Thank God for that.
Oh boy. Yeah, I think laughter is always the best medicine, and got to have a little humor or else life's just not worth living. But
Yeah, I
anyhow,
think that we can, paranormal investigating it, researching it. I mean, I've done with my team Rise Up Paranormal. We're in that 1,000 case range right now over the years, and a lot of times the best approach is to come in with a well-timed and appropriate joke to everybody, to sit down and be the calmest person in the room, because if they see you're not freaking out, they'll go, well, maybe I shouldn't freak out either. So hopefully we bring a little bit of that to the show, where it's just kind of like, we're going to talk, we're going to think, we want your input, but we're going to have a good time doing it.
Yeah. So, so far, we've talked about cases where all the killers are men, which I guess is probably more common. I guess that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, there are some exceptions
of course
to that rule. There always is. But for the most part, men perpetrate these crimes going back so forth.
But actually, a couple weeks ago we had on Debbie Felton, who's a professor at University of Massachusetts, and she is a classicist, and she wrote a book on serial killers in ancient Greece and Rome. And there were some women in there. Most of the women were poisoners.
Yeah, they're more creative, I think,
sneaky.
Because
sneaky.
Yeah.
But did you have
I mean, Eileen Wuornos notwithstanding.
Oh yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, poor baby. She was a mess. Yeah. But now, was one of the cases that you're sharing with us tonight, is that a woman?
Leonarda?
Yeah, Leonarda.
Leonarda Shensuli, yeah.
I don't know about, I'm going to try that last name.
Is
a woman from the small town of Correggio, Italy, by the name of Leonardo Cianciulli, was told by a teller that all of her children were going to die before her. Leonardo was a well-liked shopkeeper in her town, but this dark premonition would lead her down a dark path. To Leonarda, this portent of disaster seemed reasonable, as she had married a clerk named Raphael Pansardi, to whom she had borne 4 children, but had actually been pregnant 17 times, with 3 of these resulting in miscarriages and the others dying during childhood. Leonarda had become convinced that her mother had cursed her for marrying her husband without her consent. The superstitious Cianciulli began to believe that her remaining children's lives were in mortal danger, especially son Giuseppe, who had just shipped off to fight in the Italian army at the beginning of World War II. As she became consumed by what she believed to be the forthcoming deaths of her 4 surviving children, Leonarda somehow determined that the only way to save them was to perform blood sacrifices to appease the dark forces engulfing her and her family. In 1939, she concocted a diabolical plan to lure a single friend and customer named Faustina Seti to her shop by telling her that she had found her a potential husband. When Seti arrived, Leonarda ambushed her and killed her with an axe, and stole whatever money her victim had on her. With her first blood sacrifice completed, Leonarda disposed of the body by boiling it into candles and cakes. She also dumped the sludge into a septic tank, then made tea cakes with the coagulated blood. Most of the tea cakes, she later claimed, she fed to visitors, but she admitted that both she and Giuseppe ate some as well. Another friend named Francesca Soavi was her next victim. Francesca was lured into the shop believing a job awaited her there, but Leonarda drugged and killed her, dismembered her corpse, and, like Raphael, made it into candles and cakes after robbing her. Cianciulli's third and final victim was Virginia Cacioppo, a former soprano said to have sung at La Scala. Cianciulli claimed to have found work as the secretary for a mysterious impresario in Florence, and as with the other two women, she was instructed not to tell a single person where she was going. Cacioppo agreed, and on September 30th of 1940, she met her fate as the others did. However, unlike the first two victims, Cacioppo's body was melted to make soap. Leonarda claimed that her flesh was so white and fat that it made a lovely creamy soap. With both victims, Cianciulli continued to make her tea cakes with her blood. Cacioppo's sister grew suspicious of her sudden disappearance and had last seen her entering Cianciulli's house. She reported this to the superintendent of police in Reggio Emilia, who opened an investigation and soon arrested Cianciulli. Cianciulli did not confess to the murders until it was believed that her son, Giuseppe Pansardi, was involved in the crime. She then provided detailed accounts of what she had done in order to save him from any blame. Cianciulli was found guilty of murder in 1940 and spent her remaining years behind bars. She would spend the last 3 years of her life in the Women's Criminal Asylum at Pozzuoli. On October 15, 1970, she died of cerebral apoplexy, which is similar to a stroke.
Oh, gosh. I do remember that because I remember the tea cakes. Oh, my gosh. I have seen that one before on a documentary on YouTube. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
This was actually made into a Broadway play.
That's crazy.
And a documentary and a short film in Italian. And books have been written on it. So a lot of people might not be aware of this woman, but it shows you that serial killing is just not unique to the United States. But again, that is
didn't fool around with the poison. She went right with the axe.
I mean, she was creative, to say the least. So there are elements, obviously, of murder, of cannibalism, mutilation. I mean, I don't know where to start unpacking it. Let's start unpacking it, how it all started with the idea of a certain clairvoyant or fortune teller or palm reader.
Yeah.
And so obviously she was immersed in this type of thing. And we read it, listen, we read about it all the time, right? Where someone is taken for tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars by a fake psychic who says you need to do A, B, and C to avoid, some type of tragedy in your life.
Yeah.
And people get so immersed in it that they won't make a move without consulting the psychic. Okay, so we read about that all the time, even in modern times. But to drive someone to murder, because you honestly think you're appeasing some type of force out there. But then there were other
sacrifices.
She was robbing people too. So this seemed like, and she was well respected as a shop owner in her small Italian town. But at what point does she say, the murder thing's okay, but I can make a few bucks off this too?
And in those days, clothes and things were very valuable because people didn't have a lot of clothes, a lot of clothing. And so what she would do, of course, is pack your best things and come on over. You're going to go to this wonderful place. And so she would sell the clothes or use the clothes. That was part of the reason. And also there are other items, jewelry, anything else, their money. Sometimes if they thought they were going somewhere, they'd have cash on them for the trip. And so, yeah, she had a little thing going there.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the best thought out plan, fortunately, one victim is too much, but, had it not been for the awareness of the daughter of her third victim, who knows? This may have continued. People are just vanishing.
Yeah.
But this was a case of, I now have a dead body. What do I do with it? Let me think this through. I know I'll mutilate it and then it's not enough to I'll take it out to the country and dump it in the woods somewhere. It's like, no, I'm going to make use of this with tea cakes and soap. And so I think that we've gone past the idea of what a mother will do for their children, which is, this is the ultimate mama bear, obviously. But the love you have for your children will make you do some things that you weren't thought you were capable of to protect them, especially in her case, losing, being pregnant 17 times and so many miscarriages. She would do anything to protect her family. In this case, I just think it got away from her. Obviously, this just in, it got away from her. To the point that some other sort of influences take over. Now, unlike the first two characters we talked about, I don't think she was compelled by Satan or anything like that, but she was compelled by fortune telling and certain elements of the metaphysical. We would call it new agey now.
Yeah.
But obviously, this meant a lot to her. This was a big part of her life, the idea of clairvoyance and clairsentience. And, it was also rumored that she considered herself to be something of a psychic as well. That might have been through osmosis, but
maybe.
I guess the cautionary tale here is be careful as far as, putting your stock in psychics and palm readers and fortune tellers and etc. and so far. This is why these days they come with a disclaimer for entertainment only.
Yeah.
Entertainment is the key word here, folks, not murderous impulses. Entertainment.
That's it. If I could, I'd like to share my murder story with you and the audience.
Excuse me?
There's been I didn't commit a murder.
There's something we should, okay.
No.
All right.
But it's just a murder that occurred in my home state of Oklahoma back in June of 1977. And it's a case that, it wasn't just me, but the whole entire state was obsessed with this case. And people, were either on one side or the other. They thought the suspect was guilty or they thought there was no way. And I ended up doing a lot of research and had some inadvertent involvements with certain aspects of the case just because of my proximity to it. But I'm talking about the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders in June of 1977 that I first heard about on my car radio as I was driving to California. I was moving to Los Angeles. That was the night that I moved. And I heard this on my little AM radio in my 10-year-old Chevrolet, this story come across the radio about these 3 little Girl Scouts who were found murdered after the first night of encampment at Camp Scott in Oklahoma. And these little girls were from the Tulsa area, which is where I was from. And I worked in radio there. And so I had a lot of like law enforcement connections, and then and of course media connections. But the main suspect in this case, and the only suspect really, turned out to be a man by the name of Gene Leroy Hart, who was a Cherokee Indian, and he was.
Why do they always have 3 names?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know that.
I'm just thinking out loud here.
I mean, I've called him Gene Hart before, but they always say Gene Leroy Hart, so I just thought I'd throw that in. But anyway, he was a football player. He was, youngish guy in his early 20s, and he had been a local football star and all that. But he'd also been in some trouble, so he was no angel. In fact, at the time of these murders, he was an escaped prisoner, and he had been convicted of rape of 2 young pregnant women, and they managed, thank God, to escape from him. So, but then he escaped from prison, and so they were on the lookout for him at that time. And when these 3 little girls came up missing, of course, it was in this heavily forested area called the Cookson Hills, and it's just like hundreds of thousands of acres of woodlands and all that. So he was hiding out from the law in the Cookson Hills. Well, it was the biggest manhunt in Oklahoma history. And the OSBI, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, were in charge. And they set up a mobile campsite there in the area. And this manhunt included, helicopters, tracking dogs, huge amounts of different agencies, and they just couldn't find this guy. Well, all of the investigators, all the agents were at least part Indian, and one of them was full-blood Indian, and he was Cheyenne Arapaho. And they found him one night down at the creek side, and he was what the Indians call it was smoking himself, which I think a lot of people refer to it as smudging. But he was, purifying himself. And a couple of the other agents came upon him and asked him, what are you doing? And he says, I'll tell you, but you better not make fun of it. And they said, no. And he says, I'm purifying myself, and I'm sending this smoke out, and it's going to land somewhere. It's going to go to someone who can help us. And the other guy says, can you do us too? So he did. And just as they were completing the ceremony, the phone, the mobile phone in the base camp started to ring, and they ran to get it. And it was a photographer who part-time would go once a week and teach a photography class at the prison at McAllister to the inmates. And there had been a photograph found among the evidence of a wedding, and it was in the evidence that they knew belonged to the perpetrator, but they couldn't figure out, who these people were. So they had published the picture in the papers in the Tulsa World. This photographer saw it and said, I know that picture. That was a wedding that I photographed. And those pictures were developed at the prison. And so they figured out that it was Gene Leroy Hart, who had developed those pictures, and that it so happened that the bride bore a hugely strong resemblance to his estranged wife. And so they feel that that's why he kept that photograph. But it was interesting that phone rang just at the time that they did that ritual by the creek, and it did go on someone who helped them. They knew then who they were looking for sure. And it went on that way. Well, they just couldn't find this guy. They couldn't track him. But yet he was turning up at local, like the stomp dances. I don't know if people are familiar with those, but around Oklahoma, that is actually in some tribes a form of worship, is doing the stomp dance. And they'll have these stomp dances where they'll gather, and they'll usually be like deep in the woods somewhere or something. But he would be showing up at stomp dances. Obviously people were helping him, but for some reason the police just couldn't track him. So the agents decided that they would go, and they also were told, he's using magic. So they went and visited their own medicine man, and he said, this killer is being helped by a powerful medicine man. And the agent said, well, wait a minute. I thought that you could not use the medicine man's power for evil purposes. And their medicine man said, well, you can, if the medicine man believes if he doesn't know it's evil, his powers will work. And so he gave the agents these little medicine bags to wear around their necks. And he said, when you come upon him, split off. And if you get in between you, he won't be able to see you. You'll be invisible. So they actually, wore these medicine bags and everything. They had some very weird experiences out in the woods with different animals. And it was later said that Gene Hart was a shapeshifter. And he was a member of the Katua band of Cherokee Indians, which are known as the original people, because they still practice the original ways. The Cherokee Nation is pretty westernized, pretty modernized, and, all that. But the Katua band are the ones that still, sort of practiced a lot of the mystical practices.
The fundamentalists.
Right.
Kind of, yeah.
And so it was said that Gene Hart was able to turn himself into a bird or an animal. And they had several weird situations like that. The tracking dogs that were brought from Pennsylvania, because they were so good and accurate, one of them just dropped dead on the spot. No explanation, and the remaining ones tracked him. They got a scent, and they were running and running, and then they got to a middle of a field, and they just stopped and started going around in circles, and that of course fed the idea that Gene Hart was able to become a bird and just go up into the air. But the trial itself was very weird. They did finally catch him, and that was a whole story in itself. It's just too much to go into. But the trial, there were reports in the newspapers, and those, and people that I knew that actually attended the trial, there were medicine men, working rituals outside at the four corners of the courthouse to confuse the jury, to influence the jury. And they had an unbelievable amount of physical evidence against Gene Hart. He had items from the little girls, that he had stolen from their tents when he abducted them. It was just a plethora of evidence that they had against him, but he was acquitted. And on that day, I think there was something like 36 agents on the OSBI. 32 of them quit because they said, this is crazy.
Because of the acquittal.
Because of the acquittal. And of course, the parents of the little girls, were just devastated. But that's not the end of the story either. So Gene Hart was acquitted, but he still had to go back to prison because it still had that other charge for those two other young women. And so and this is key. the medicine man for the agents told them, yes, you can use the medicine man's power for evil purposes if he believes you. But if you deceive the medicine man, you'll die. So right after Gene Hart was sent back to McAllister State Prison, one day he was jogging around the yard there at the prison, just getting some exercise. And he just dropped to the ground and his heart just stopped. He was 25 years old and a perfect physical specimen. There was no explanation why he would just die. So that's the kind of end of the story, but it's not the end of the controversy. There are still people that feel he was innocent and try to come up with some other theories. I, of course, believed it. He was guilty. I later became good friends with the agents and visited one of them, a guy by the name of Mike Wilkerson. He and his brother, who later became a state senator there, were a couple of the lead agents there. And Mike Wilkerson was one that quit that day, and he became a documentary producer. And he produced a great documentary on this. It's old now, but it's still good. It's called Someone Cry for the Children. And he and his brother also wrote a book by that same title about the crime. So I got a chance to go to his office and go through all the stuff. He showed me the medicine bag, which he still carries with him all the time, all the newspaper clippings. He shared some inside information that they never made public because it would harm, people. And but it was really interesting. And I've always wanted to see a movie made from it, but never got the chance to do it. But anyhow, it was very.
My only question for that was that, is there any kind of insight into why these shamans outside the courtroom were in a spiritual sense, aiding and abetting him?
Because they believed him.
Okay.
They did not think.
Okay.
That, listen, to the Cherokee, as in many cultures, children are just sacred. And they could not accept that one of their own would have committed these horrible crimes on little girls. So it was something they couldn't accept. That's it.
I'm chuckling because there's a correlation between that and the Lizzie Borden acquittal.
Well, yeah.
Because a jury could not believe in 1892 a woman could have committed these acts, even though there was a lot of fingers and a lot of evidence. I mean, I use the term evidence loosely because obviously back then, I mean, they were trapping over the crime scene and it was awful. But for the most part, that's what got her off, was the idea that people could not believe a woman could have perpetrated such horrendous or such horrible crimes.
I remember there was this one reporter, this girl, this young woman, I should say, at the time. I think she was for one of the papers or something, but she was this total Gene Hart supporter. And she was just, like so happy when they acquitted him, and she was just like, oh, I knew he wasn't guilty, blah, blah, blah. And so the agents offered her to ride in the car with him as they took him back to prison. And she sat in the back seat with him. She wouldn't do it.
Jeez.
They said, oh, you can interview him. No. She wouldn't.
Yeah. Why?
So I don't know. Sometimes people get on a bandwagon and they just don't get off because they're getting attention in some way, especially if it's sort of a contrarian point of view.
Yeah, but there's so many, I find, interesting elements to that story. Native American spirituality, and the idea that there is some preconceived notions. Being in Oklahoma, because of being, such a, Native American presence there.
That's it.
Still, tribes who, survive till this day and have
Oh my
such
gosh.
influence over
We
the
have
area.
120 tribes there. I think
Yeah.
39 tribes are actually headquartered in Oklahoma. And it wasn't by choice, obviously. They got driven to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, basically. So this is not their original lands, most of them, but this is where they are and where they remain. And yeah, it was just such an inherent part of our culture growing up. It was strange because we thought we knew a lot about the Native American culture, but it wasn't until I was really grown up and I realized how much was really not shared, and not that there's anything wrong with that, because I think a lot of people didn't really understand it and deserve to really know the inner goings on and things like that of the tribal practices and spirituality and everything.
Right. Well, it also sounds like the agents had reached that point of desperation that they entertained the idea of doing something a little different.
Yeah.
In terms of entertaining the idea. It's like, you see it with certain police forces because, you hear from psychics all the time. I work with the police force. And then if you check on it, they don't know who you are. So,
Yeah.
but this not to say that psychics haven't been employed by police forces and just, not in the numbers they would have you believe. But there comes a point where people want resolution. They want closure. You have a grieving family. You have a criminal at large, and you certainly don't want him to do this again. So you can, at times, I guess, step outside your own head and say, listen, let's just try it. We will look into anything. And in this case, whether it was happenstance or whatever the case may be, it seemed to work out in the end, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there were so many weird aspects about that crime that just seem. Oh, I told you I had some connections to it. The little girls were in tent number 8, which was the tent that was furthest away from the counselors and the closest to the woods. And there were only 3 of them in there, although there were tents of 4. But how these 3 little girls ended up there was that all the kids were allowed to choose their own tent mates. And these 3 little girls didn't know anyone else. And so they were the 3 that were left over. And so they were in tent number 8. In tent number 7 was my sister's best friend's daughter. I mean, that's how close this crime was. And then the 3 little girls, that part just broke my heart for some reason.
Oh, God, yes.
Like they were the leftover girls, and it's just too much. But one of the little girls were Lori Farmer, Michelle Gousset, and Denise Milner. Now, Lori Farmer's dad was a prominent doctor in town, and her mother later started a support group for parents of murdered children. Michelle's dad was a department store executive, and Denise Milner's father was a Tulsa police detective. And but Denise's mother said that the day before, and the day of, she begged not to go. She changed her mind. She didn't want to go, and she begged her. And so her mom says, I tell you what, go ahead, you'll like it once you get there. Well, that night she was still upset, and she went to the counselor and asked if she could call her mother to come and get her. And her mother said, if you still feel the same way tomorrow, we'll call her. Well, of course, she didn't make it through the night.
Right.
But the other weird thing was Denise had a little sister that was, 3 or 4 years younger than her, just a very young child. And that night, that day before, she asked her mom, why do people die? And she says, well, that's just a part of life. And she says, people die and then new people are born. And the little girl said, tomorrow, everybody's going to die. Out of the mouths of babes.
Okay.
Anyway, just so many weird things about this crime. And it was, of course, so upsetting because of the fact that it was 3 little girls, how much worse could it be?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the elements to this story. I mean, it's enough, it's.
I'll have to lend you that book or find a link to that documentary so you can see it. It's
Sure.
A lot of people that were there were interviewed and things. The counselor the young girl who ended up finding the girls along the trail, along Cookie Trail the next morning, murdered, became a police officer after that. Went to school, studied, and became a Tulsa police officer. She remains to this day. It affected so many people's lives. My old boss, Richard Dowdell, who was my boss at a station called KAKC in Tulsa. We were a rock and roll station, but we were the news department. And after I was gone and he had already left, he became the one news reporter that Gene Hart would agree to be interviewed by. And tragically, Richard had built such a relationship with these grieving parents. He just felt such, sorrow for them and got really close to them. Well, Gene Hart did say, he would be interviewed by Richard Dowdell, but only if he got to supply the questions. And Richard, of course, that's a big no-no for a reporter.
Of course.
But Richard, a young news reporter, thought, I'm going to get this chance and I'll see what I can sneak in. Well, the questions were things like, what kind of music do you like? What do you like to read? Oh, I read the classics and I listen to a lot of classical music and, just try to make himself come out smelling like a rose. And after that interview, the parents all really got upset with Richard. And I think it probably haunts him to this day. He feels so badly about it.
Yeah, it was, I think probably he should have followed his first impulse.
Yeah.
And that's just not give this guy any kind of attention. I mean, if you don't, somebody else will. I understand
but
that.
Even to this day, Richard will tell you that was the biggest story of his career.
Yeah, I mean,
and there's a lot of time
both ways, I guess, but
it was like the most, and it just went on for so long, and because he was on the loose for a long time. It was just a crazy thing. But yeah, so the paranormal, if you will, came into play with both the perpetrator possibly and the police agents.
Yeah, certainly did.
Yeah. So, but one of the stories, I'll just tell you real quick and then I'll get off this. I know I'm obsessed, was the 2 brothers, Mike Wilkerson and his brother, and I'm failing on his first name, Mike and Dick Wilkerson. They decided just to go out and go fishing and sort of camp out and just look like 2 guys, out there hanging out, not like 2 cops. And they decided that they would sit around a campfire, and one of them would always stay awake because they knew he was close by. And one of them would stay awake while the other one slept, and then vice versa. Well, I guess Mike Dick was taking his break and asleep, and Mike was sitting up by the campfire, and he said he started to nod off, and he was startled awake by this scream, and he opened his eyes, and leaping to his face was this black cat that just leaped on him and then took off. And it was so weird. Of course, everybody wondered whether or not that was Gene Hart, shape-shifting into a cat. But it was interesting that it was a black cat, and, it was like waiting for him just to close his eyes for a second so it could pounce. But it was almost like it didn't want to do anything to them. It just wanted to show them that it was there.
Are pumas even a thing in Oklahoma?
No. Now, there have been reports of panthers occasionally in the area. And in fact, the name of my high school mascot was the Panthers. Okay. And they're almost like a mystical creature, but I want to say in the last couple of years, there's been some information out that they actually found that these cats do exist in the wild there. They don't know whether it was from like animals escaping from a circus and then reproducing.
The phenomenon is called alien big cats, and there are large cats even in England that don't belong there. So a lot of times they're exotic pets that just get too big and just too much for their owners to take care of. So they just release them into the wild. And then, they'll crossbreed or whatever the case may be, but they're not indigenous to that particular area. So, this happens a lot all over the country.
Yeah, they crossbreed, and that's where you get your chupacabras.
That's where you get the chupacabras? All right, okay.
Because they definitely are a crossbreed of something, if indeed they are real as well. Now, I think we have one more, and I also want to thank you so much, Ken, for putting together these video clips. These are just absolutely amazing. I should have had one for my story, but I didn't. I feel so, embarrassed.
No, absolutely not. In fact, Sunday, I should probably tell everybody what's going to happen. We are on our initial show. We've also got some clips that we're going to, incorporate into the show in the second hour. But we are going to be visiting with the possibly two most haunted dolls in the world, Annabelle and Robert the Doll.
Robert! Oh, no!
Robert is making an appearance on the second half of the show directly from the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida.
Oh, gosh, he's coming in. He's coming in remotely.
Caretaker David Sloan. We have an interview with him, and there's also an incredible story about Robert the Doll and Ozzy Osbourne that you're going to have to tune into Sunday night to hear.
Oh, and my gosh.
It's pretty wild. So in the second half, we'll have Robert in the background during the interview so everybody can see him. And in the first hour,
be glued to him because they're going to be looking for any kind of movement.
No, we were too.
It's like,
we were too.
He's staring at that guy.
Yeah. In the first hour, we'll have Tony Sparrow, who runs the Warrens Occult Museum in Connecticut.
Oh, cool.
And he'll be talking about Annabelle. Unsure whether or not he will be broadcasting or live from the museum. That's yet to be determined. But I think that's a great way to kick off our first episode on KGRA. So there'll be that and those kind of things. Yeah, we'll do some wild stuff.
Maybe
so I just wanted to mention that.
We could hook up Annabelle and Robert.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
I think they would be at odds with each other. It's like Ghostbusters crossing the streams. I'm not taking that chance.
Exactly. Well, we have one more video I'd like to look at if everyone's game. So here we go.
In the early 1980s, a group of Satan worshippers led by Robin Gecht and his main minions, Edward Spreitzer and brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokorales, routinely met at Gecht's home to perform dark rituals and worship at his satanic chapel, which was adorned with imagery and artifacts related to the devil. On May 23, 1981, the mutilated body of 28-year-old Linda Sutton was found dumped in an abandoned field near Villa Park, Illinois, with one of her breasts completely amputated. A year later, the body of a woman named Lorraine Borowski was found in a cemetery in the same area 5 months after she had disappeared. A third woman named Shuey Mock would be found dead 4 months after vanishing. Then a prostitute named Angel York was found, stabbed, strangled, and barely alive by the Chicago River, with one of her breasts having been cut. She gave a description of her attackers to police, but the details were sketchy at best. Then the body of another prostitute named Sandra Delaware was found on August 28, 1982, also stabbed, strangled, and with a breast sliced off. Other victims would appear, including a survivor, Beverly Washington, who had suffered very similar injuries to the previous victims. However, Washington's testimony, including a description of the van they used, would lead investigators to Gecht, along with Spreitzer and the Kokorelis brothers. Under interrogation, Thomas Kokorelis admitted that the group had taken women back to Gecht's satanic chapel to torture and rape them, as well as surgically remove their breasts, which they would then consume portions of and place the rest into a box. Other members would claim that Gecht possessed supernatural powers, including the ability to influence people psychologically and physically and enthrall them to do his bidding. They believed that through such rituals that they too could harness such amazing powers. Gecht fully denied these allegations, but was nonetheless convicted of murder, and the group is believed to be responsible for somewhere around 18 murders and disappearances. What would be named the Chicago Rippers were eventually convicted. Andrew Kokorelis and Spreitzer were sentenced to death, while Gecht received 120 years in prison, and Thomas Kokorelis received a 70-year sentence. Thomas was eventually released from prison in March 2019 after serving half of his sentence, while Edward Spreitzer's death sentence was commuted in 2003.
Wow.
So
Everybody
again,
thinks I'm a monster, he says. Oh.
yeah, I'm not a monster. So, I mean, this happened in the 80s. So we're not talking about ancient history here, but
Oh.
I chose these for the show, Renee, because each one of them has a different type of quality about it in terms of, you know, what compels people to do this. How does the paranormal tie in? We talked about fortune tellers and how, you know, they can influence people to do crazy things. You have to be crazy to begin with, I think, to, you know, take it up on it.
I have to say, you know, there's been times, you know, and I know, and psychics aren't really supposed to do this, but because of the milieu that I have been in for the last several decades with a lot of paranormal people and psychics and things like that, a lot of times, you know, they'll say, oh, you know, you have this going on, or watch out for this, or you better check your back tire and things like that. And, you know, just unsolicited. And then I have in the past, you know, gone to psychics and they've said something that was a little disturbing. And it wasn't like I banked on it. You know, it's not like I scripted my life on it, but it would have like a little nagging feeling, you know, like, ooh, I hope that's not true, especially if it was something about one of my kids. And so I see how that could happen, especially if you're the type of person that is really totally bought into the whole, you know, to that particular psychic.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain confirmation bias that happens because a lot of times the, you know, more unscrupulous of them will talk in general terms. It's like your back tire. Yeah, eventually at some point it may take a year, but your back tire goes flat or something like that. And you immediately hark back to, you know, what they said. It's just kind of like, and there's a term that's used for it, but, you know, we have all had that instance where you're thinking about somebody, the phone rings and it's them.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes.
Okay, so that may happen 4 times a year, but there's a reason. You've had some kind. It's not like very rarely does somebody call you're thinking of, you haven't seen in 25 years, and then the phone rings, it's them. It's usually a close acquaintance. You're just thinking, well, we have to do this and that, and they call. Some people can let that go as happenstance. Other people dwell on it, can't let it go. And those are the people that you hear a lot of times say, oh, it's always happens to me. Well, it happens to everybody.
Yeah.
But some of us are able to let it go and just say, oh, that's funny. And then you never think about it again. You put it in a box and that's the end of it. But some people can't.
Yeah, you might say it's kind of amusing, when it happens.
And I don't think of it any deeper than that. To just, circle back on the point of this video. Now we see someone who's like a Manson-like figure.
Yes.
And that's the other thing that happens. Sometimes there is someone out there that's so charismatic that he can take otherwise normal people, men, women, kids, whatever the case may be, and almost bend their will.
Yes.
With his, because at one point in the video you saw where it's like, oh, if we do this, then we'll have the power of this guy. Now, I couldn't tell you why 3 other guys from Chicago, blue collar town, would decide that one of them is some kind of, Messiah type figure. I have no idea. I'm sure there's more to the story than that. I mean, you guys were in a bowling league or something, and and then you went from that to this, where we're talking about, sexual assault, cannibalism, and it's just how do you get there from here? And then later on tell a news broadcast that, well, people think I'm a monster. It's dude, because you are a monster.
What
You're a damn monster. You're a freak.
It's crazy. It's just crazy. But yeah, that whole cult mentality thing is very scary, because you're absolutely right. An absolutely normal, regular person under certain circumstances can get sucked in. I did my paper in college.
We don't see that in the world these days, do we?
Not at all. I did my paper on cults. I think the name of it was cults, seduction and induction, and who is vulnerable. And that was the question I had to answer. And my conclusion was anyone. Anyone could be vulnerable depending on, the conditions at the time.
Sure.
And I think people, get caught up and then they get invested. But I'm just talking about cults. I'm not talking about serial killing cults. So that's another story altogether.
Yeah, cults in itself has a very wide definition.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We are not necessarily talking about hoods and and we're not necessarily talking about
or
that.
Even religious cults or anything like that.
Anything.
Yeah. Yep.
Anything at all.
It's a very, very scary proposition.
Be careful. So the message is: be careful. Think for yourself.
Please
use reason. Reason with yourself. Come on, you were raised better than that, people.
Do the research and don't just do it on social media. Do it reliable sources. There are, many, many reliable sources out there on just about any subject.
They do exist. I know, hard to believe, but they do exist.
They do. They truly do. Gosh, we're down to almost nothing here. I can't believe it. I think this is the fastest show I've done in a long time.
Oh, you're pretty quick tonight.
You've manipulated time. How did you do
It's mind control.
That's it.
Join us.
I'm now a member of the cult of Kenny D.
Ooh, that's a dark place to be. You don't want to be there.
Sort of hypnotized or something.
Yeah, we're talking about your low bars before. That's pretty much it. But this has been a gas. This has been a pleasure. Always, it's good to just see and talk to you anyway. But
Oh, I
Appreciate
know.
you
It's
having
like
me on. This has
it's
been
like
great.
one of our phone conversations, but I want to remind everyone again to look for Dead Air on Sunday. Ken DeCosta and George R. Lopez, they are great. They have a great time. I was just on their show, and I had a ball. I was only going to come on for like half an hour or so, and I ended up staying the whole time.
It was a cult.
Tried to kick me off, but I hacked into their system, and they couldn't lose me. So
That's it.
it
That's
put up
right.
with me
That's
the whole
right.
time.
That's right. We're so easy. It's so easy to manipulate.
Yeah. Well, gosh, can't wait for Sunday to see you guys
Me too.
do your big launch on KGRA. And, you got to come back on my show sometime. We'll have to think
Sure.
of some kind of special sometime where we'll cover a subject on my show and then continue it on the Sunday.
Ooh, a crossover. Yeah, we can
And
do
that
like
sounds good.
a ER and Chicago Fire type
That's
thing.
right.
We leave like we have to decide who gets the cliffhanger though. We need to one of the shows has to get the cliffhanger.
Well, let's see. Oh, I get the cliffhanger because I'm on before you.
You're on Friday,
Yeah.
right? So there will be resolution. We'll bring it on.
Well,
You know what I mean?
You'll get the resolution.
It'll be either something really dramatic or it'll end up looking like The Simpsons. Who knows?
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Remember, next week we'll be right here, but an hour later at 11 p.m. Eastern time to 1 a.m. So join us again. We're going to be talking about the history of the paranormal with, I think, a focus on UFOs next week. So please join us. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Bill Forte, our wonderful producer and program director.
Hey, Bill.
Bill.
Bill.